Another top story we've been following, the Secret Service's acting director says the agency is in need of a crucial paradigm shift and an expanded footprint in order to protect the nation's leaders. CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Sganga joins us now on this. Nicole, you were in the room. What did we learn from today's press briefing?
Absolutely, Lindsay. And the acting director of the U.S. Secret Service, Ronald Rowe, did not mince words. He talked about a lack of follow through from agents on the ground in Butler County on July 13th. Complacency, an over-reliance on cellular devices. He said when the call came in at 6:08 from local law enforcement that there was police officers that were dealing with a situation at the 3 o'clock, that they were trying to apprehend a suspicious person. At that point, there was a member of the former president's detail that picked up the phone to try to get additional information from the Secret Service's Pittsburgh field office. And as that phone call was ongoing, shots rang out. A handful of current and former law enforcement officials have brought it to my attention that there were perhaps resources that the Secret Service could have provided on July 13th that may have prevented this tragedy from happening. A counter-assault team advance, agents who would have been on the ground days before to look for those light-of-sign threats to the former president, perhaps enhanced counter-drone technology. I asked the acting director exactly that, and he said that to his knowledge, he's not aware of any formal request that went through from Trump's detail for additional resources, but he's looking into whether or not there were unofficial asks for more assets on the ground that were not granted on that day. Bottom line, we have not seen any personnel changes in the aftermath of this performance review, this phase one, so to speak, of Secret Service's audit into what happened that day. That could change in the coming days and weeks. However, the acting director said he's not going to broadcast those moves.
You know, it's one thing to say there needs to be a paradigm shift, and we've heard Rowe say that again this week. But in terms of the granular, what is being done to address these issues, to appease lawmakers and just the public, that the protectees are in fact protected, did Director Rowe give any indication today about anything more specific?
Yeah, and there's sort of the short term here, Lindsay, and then there's the long term. So let's address it one by one. The short term is that the former president has been granted the highest level of U.S. Secret Service protection. Now, what does that actually mean? It means that he has the footprint that President Joe Biden has when he travels, counter-assault teams, counter-drone technology, counter-surveillance team, counter-snipers, like the ones we saw on the roof on some of the sheds there at the Butler County Farm Show on July 13th, that those are now just built in to the former president's detail as he travels and continues his very rigorous campaign schedule. In fact, he was asked to question the acting director today about the House bill that was just greenlit that would grant the former president the exact same Secret Service resources as the president. And he said, look, we're already doing that. Now, in the long term, they have a real training challenge. Because it takes anywhere from 4 to 10 years for someone in a presidential protective detail to get enough training to actually reach that level. Rowe did address that. He said they have 400 new special agents that have enlisted this year. He said that the Secret Service, for the first time in many years, has had a net gain of over 100 within the agency. But he has been clear in recent days that they are essentially redlining, that they need to figure out how they're going to maintain this very heavy security posture for the president, the vice president, the former president, the VP nominees long term. He said there are ongoing discussions on Capitol Hill regarding what resources the Secret Service would need, but he didn't announce any specifics or give a dollar amount today, Lindsay.
It's interesting because both he has said there's a need for more funding. Secretary Mayorkas has said that. President Biden has said that. But then CBS News talked to 3 senators on Capitol Hill yesterday who said they don't want to just throw money at the problem. They want to make sure everything is being managed properly. Did the director go into that at all today?
I mean, the director said that they have been working the halls of Capitol Hill. In fact, we have reported that Secret Service was on the Hill talking to that House task force as recently as yesterday, and that they are discussing exactly where some of these appropriations would go, how to make some of the short-term appropriations or, changes that would need in order to pay overtime for agents who are now working around the clock to ensure that the protective details are in place. One thing he alluded to is maybe moving some of the agents from field offices, those who are perhaps, in ongoing investigations, who are working in other sectors within the U.S. Secret Service to protective missions, trying to shift the resources that are already in place. And certainly on the training component, he made it very clear that this is a long-term project. It's not something that's going to change overnight.
Where do things stand in the investigation into Sunday's apparent assassination attempt of former President Trump?
We asked the acting director whether or not he considers that response by the U.S. Secret Service to be a success. And he had an interesting answer. He didn't outright say yes, but he said that agents did what they were trained to do on that day, of course, detecting the barrel of that SKS rifle, before the suspect there could get any shots fired off. He did speak to some of the challenges of protecting a golf course. Many reporters pressed Rowe about whether or not he has advised the former president not to go golfing. And, he said his conversations with the president will stay between him and the former president. CBS News has reported that the Secret Service didn't get much of a heads up. About 30 minutes ahead of time, they knew that the former president would be golfing at his namesake course in West Palm Beach. That does mean that agents were scrambling to get in place and do what they needed to do. But obviously, this investigation is ongoing. The FBI has taken on, the lead in terms of figuring out how the suspect, Ryan Routh, got so close, along that fence line there, and whether or not he had scouted out the golf course beforehand. They are working right now on a timeline, sort of detailing the suspect's movements in the weeks and days ahead of that second assassination attempt.
That timeline will be crucial. Nicole Sganga, thank you.
Thank you.